Hello, and welcome to the wind down here of week 3 of summer term. I wanted to check in, say hi, comment on the forum as usual, just give you a little update on where we're at in the class. Our topic this week was learning and memory, and the two chapter readings, forum discussion, which I've looked over and enjoyed reading that. It's fun to get people's opinions on technology, how it affects their memory, and also their opinions on whether or not that technology is having a negative effect on certain aspects of their life and possibly health, for example, with driving while texting. I'm sure nobody in the class does that, but you've seen many of people do it. There's a lot of people that do it. If you just stand at a corner in downtown Medford or Ashland or wherever you are, if it's a busy enough place, you're going to find a lot of people on their phones, and that's kind of a scary thing. So I want to come back to that issue, apply it a little bit to memory, and give you some of my thoughts on it, and try not to be too cynical about it because it's a little pet peeve of mine. Anyway, the first question about whether memory or how technology has affected your memory had, I think, a lot of people finding that it was maybe having possibly a negative effect because of the distraction of the technological device itself. So having the computer on, a couple of you mentioned that within the course of posting the discussion, you had checked 5 different, websites during that time, just because you felt compelled to do so. So clearly your attentional systems were not totally focused on the topic at hand. And remember, in that Atkinson-Shiffrin model of memory, attention, that which kind of filters through your sensory registers and puts that information into working memory, that is continuously vulnerable to distraction. It's a visual distraction, or an auditory distraction, or the combination of those things. That can be problematic and distracting, and that ultimately they can affect memory, not so much, at least in this description, this topic that so far as I'm discussing it here, it's not even affecting memory per se. It's affecting just information flowing into memory in the first place. The information may not get there if you're too distracted. So that's one side of it, although others made compelling cases that I think that these devices can help your memory, and that's great. There are some ways that it can help you organize the way you think and the way you see and hear things by having that device to do so. But there's a side of it too where you treat it maybe more as a bit of a crutch. There's you can use navigational apps for your phones. I'm sure you all know. You're probably laughing at me because I sound like I don't know these things. I do have a smartphone and I do use it, probably not in the smartest way, but I can navigate with it. I know how to pull up the navigator, which brings me to the next point: is that your spatial memory, your memory for your spatial surroundings, really is affected by what you see, what you hear, and also the kinesthetic feedback, the physical feedback you get from navigating yourself around. And if you're completely relying upon the navigator, well, it may impair your spatial memory. Maybe it's happened to you before where you need to get to the same place. You've been there before. Maybe it was a week before you used a navigator and you can't remember, so you just pull it up again and use it for something you've already done. So maybe that's an impaired learning to some degree. Is that a real problem? I don't think so. I do think it's funny. There's a episode of The Office where Michael Scott drives right into a lake because he's literally following the directions of the navigator. Hopefully that's not happened to you. But I think that where it can be problematic and more consequential is in relying too much on those devices as maybe being an extension of your memory. So being able to pull up, I guess it's the device and also what you can do with the device, like pull up Google and just search in a question that you might have, the artist who sang a given song, or who came up with or who drew a certain painted a certain work, or some kind of semantic or fact-based memory that you want to pull up. And you find that it can maybe be an extension of your memory that's sort of online. That was part of the article that I suggested that you read for the post for the forum, and I think that's easy to do. And maybe if you've ever, played Trivial Pursuit, I think that game. Maybe some people are saying, yeah, I play that game, but a lot of you are thinking, what is that game, and why would I want to know all that trivia? Because I can Google it, and I'm sure, and we all do. That's fine. I just think that maybe trivia is unfortunately, becoming something just kind of a quaint thing that people do. But hopefully that's not going to last. I think there is an importance in just in enjoying learning for learning's sake and remembering things for the sake of it, and not becoming too reliant on Google. Again, not trying to get too cynical here, but I will now say my comments on texting and using cell phone while you drive. The hands free notion is maybe it's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't really get at the essence of what's problematic there, and that is the lack of attention paid to what's in front of you, what's going on in your periphery when you're driving. People have gone, been looking straight ahead and smacked right into somebody or something because they were so engrossed in conversation. Their attention was very much deep into the conversation and not on what the driving. And driving is something we think of as being automatic, and in a lot of ways it is, but you still have to be paying attention so that any sudden distraction or sudden change is something that you notice and don't end up causing an accident, hurting yourself or somebody else. And that happens all too often. There's been actual research, and also I think the guys from Mythbusters went and tested this out and found that people who were using technological devices while they were driving were as impaired as somebody that did a lot of drinking. Hypothetically, imagine a scenario where we suddenly said, okay, well, let's just stop trying to enforce drinking and driving as well, and just let people drink. Can you imagine what it'd be like to be standing at that intersection and see, one out of every, I'm just going to make up a number, one out of every 5, let's go conservatively, there, people chugging a bottle of whiskey or a beer or box of wine, as they're parked temporarily at the intersection, or while they're driving. There would be an uproar. We would be outraged by that person. We might have a lot of people, calling the police, citizens arrest, things like that. But how many people call if they see somebody texting or talking on the phone? They report that person or try to flag them down and make them stop. Maybe you have, and good on you if you have. But it's a strange thing that we have, both legally and just societally, with these devices. So you can kind of see where I stand on that issue. And a lot of you in your posts were spot on. You were talking about working memory and how that distraction is disrupting the visuospatial sketchpad, your ability to keep in mind, in your mind's eye, what's in your visual field, keep track of how far away it is, whether you've passed it, the arrangement of visual information. That's a very important part of working memory, and that is going to be compromised if you're distracted. And certainly the central executive, remember that top down, that processor, that executive that controls cognitive and working memory resources, that also is compromised with when you're distracted. And so both of those, or the working memory in general, and certainly the visuospatial sketchpad as a part of that, is going to be compromised. Let's see. Last week, you guys did an experiment on the Mueller-Lyer illusion. I looked at those data. If you're curious about them, you can look those up again on MyPsychLab, clicking on course to see the course level data, or global to see the data from everyone that's ever done that experiment online for MyPsychLab. Those perceptual illusions are interesting. They tell you a lot about how, I think one of the main interesting things about those is they show you that there's a physical world out there, and that is a world that comes in through our senses, but then the brain does something different with it. The perception is something that can be highly subjective, or easily I guess, tricked into imposing a subjective interpretation of what's being perceived, or what's being sensed, excuse me. And that in turn can also be very, very false or misleading or misguiding. The Mueller-Lyer illusion is just a kind of a small demonstration that just speaks to a larger point of how sensation and perception are very different from one another, with perception being much more prone to error and illusion. And then we also, part of the topic last week was over consciousness and dreaming. And go if you haven't already, go back and look at the data for the course on dreams and the meaning of dreams. I think it was entitled "Are Dreams Meaningful?" You'll notice from your readings that Sigmund Freud, wish fulfillment theory of dreaming, thought that they were very meaningful, and then that activation synthesis hypothesis indicates that dreams aren't that meaningful. There certainly is important information that's filtering through that's being activated by the brainstem that's in turn stimulating conscious, not your cortex and not conscious experience, but your cortical experiences, your sensory experiences, stimulating those. It's also stimulating the emotional centers, and the brain as a perceiver and a synthesizer of information takes that information, creates this narrative that doesn't have conscious control, so it just becomes this bizarre, surreal kind of story in our experience. However, that's kind of the other side of the continuum of wish fulfillment. Wish fulfillment, a very rich interpretation of dreaming, which, by the way, 70% of you believe that dreams have meaning. That's a lot. Activation synthesis hypothesis does not make that argument. You also notice, though, from the reading, there's kind of a middle ground in that our dream experiences can be relevant to our everyday events, and there's the problem-solving theory. There's evidence that memory is consolidated during dreaming, both motor memories for REM sleep and for that slow wave sleep. It's semantic or declarative types of memories that are consolidated. So it is important for certainly for memory, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's meaningful. But the jury is still out, and it probably will, my guess is it will always be out. No one's ever going to really truly tap into whether dreams are meaningful and be able to answer that question with a lot of clarity. But it doesn't, of course, stop psychologists from trying, and I wish them the best at discovering that, because that's a pretty challenging scientific problem. So next week, week 4, we're almost there, heading into this final week of the course. Thought and language and motivation and emotion are our topics. Just posted the discussion forum, interesting topic of affective forecasting. There's a little TED talk to watch and a forum post to do. The weekly quizzes, My Psych Lab